Human culture thrives when discussions about what is true, what is just, and what is beautiful is remembered as an ongoing, never-ending, never-complete conversation. To quote Milton, by the known rules of ancient liberty, welcome to Risky Conversations. I am your co-host, Ace Deliri. Join us as we engage in this ancient tradition of discussions around interesting topics with utterly fascinating people. Jaffer, thank you for joining us on Risky Conversations. You are here live with me and Ember. Please give us your intro, and we'll get started from there.
Thank you for having me on. I am a serial entrepreneur based in the south suburbs of Chicago. I've been in several different industries and am a follower of the Real World Risk Institute philosophy, I believe that's what it would be. But currently, I am the CEO of Pulse TV, which is an online e-commerce company. And before that, we were doing infomercials on television, and we market on online, since 1998. So we've been doing this for quite some time.
Right on. So what exactly is it that you guys sell? Is it just a wide selection of things, or specific things that you target?
There are a lot of as seen on TV products.
Okay.
We kind of adapted a direct-to-consumer model from infomercials to online, and
Okay.
so that's so we believe in a push rather than a pull kind of marketing philosophy. So we
Okay.
try to create demand rather than just satisfy demand that somebody is searching for.
I see. And in a world with Google search and Facebook ads and Amazon competition, how do you make sure that you don't get drowned out by all those guys doing the exact same thing that you're trying to do?
Well, that's a good question. Their approach is fundamentally different. If Amazon, Walmart, Google, they exist to satisfying your demand. So their sale begins when you try to search for something. So if you want to buy something, you're going to go to Amazon, and 55% of all product searches begin on Amazon. It's already in your mind. What we do is, so what they are doing is satisfying demand. What we do is create demand by pushing offers to people in various ways, via people subscribing to receiving offers via text, via email, something called web push notification. And so we're intervening into their processes, and they didn't know they wanted an $11 flashlight until we put the offer in front of them. Really, just like a TV commercial in essence.
Right. So my question in that front is, so how do you get them to opt into your push strategy without, for lack of a better term, annoying them in the process? How do you get them on board with you sending them offers without them blocking your number or blocking your email into the junk mail folder?
Well, again, that's another good question. We in 2007, we were the first deal of the day company
Okay.
that we preceded a Groupon, and we had newsletter subscribers. People were going to our websites and subscribing to getting offers. But we didn't really start growing until we cut partnership deals with a lot of the infomercial companies. So let's say Snuggies or Total Gym or Copper Pans. Those people, they're marketing on TV, but they don't have a lot of products.
Right.
So what we did was we partnered with them and saying, look, what are you doing in between coming up with new products?
Right.
They said, well, we don't do anything. So they said, well, give me your buyers, the people that have bought from you, and we will deploy a deal of the day, a white label version, and we'll pay you a royalty off the gross, not off the net, off the gross sales. So they get a royalty, and they extend how much money they're making because they don't have enough products to sell. And so we grew from sending out 35,000 people a day to approximately 4 million every day receiving our emails.
Mm.
And then we get people to subscribe to receiving offers via text, on their phones,
Right.
and web push notifications. Those
Mhm.
are those. You ever go to a website and a pop-up says, would you allow us to send you or to notify you of new offers,
Right.
allow or block?
Right.
And we have 58,000 people who have allow us to push an offer every day, and it's not
Mm.
on our website. Is when they log into the computer, it
Ah,
pops up on their screen. So they don't even have to be on our website for them to see the offer. Just
I
like
see.
they don't have to be, on our website to get our email or our.
Mm. So from what I gather here, you're essentially helping bridge the customers that want these products with the companies that sell them. My question to you on that front is, how good are the margins in a business like that?
Well, because we give them on average about 15% of the gross,
Mm.
but we buy approximately 75% off of retail.
Okay.
All right. Understand, we're selling a lot of an individual product. So
Right.
Amazon might have 750 million SKUs or items that they sell on their website. So they don't sell a lot of individual items if you average it over 750 million.
Mm.
We sell one every day. Okay, and so we have a limited number of items that we sell, so we buy a lot of quantity of these products.
I see. I see. So when it comes to a business of that sort, because from my understanding of it, and correct me for my ignorance, I was always under the impression that most of these businesses that are selling products that are on TV are very low in terms of the margins they start with in the beginning, and yet I see them proliferating all the time. And I guess as somebody like yourself comes along, you're able to find a pathway to get them to reduce their cost of customer acquisition and then bring back some of that those savings as a profit for them. Is that the benefit? Is that why they're partnering with you? Because from what I would see it is, why wouldn't they just say, look, I see what you're trying to do. We could do it ourselves, or is it
Well,
they just rely on your expertise?
one of the problems that they're not geared to having hundreds of items to sell to consumers.
Right.
So that's one. Second of all, they don't even do their own fulfillment. We
Mm,
do.
okay.
Third is that they do. You made one small error,
Mm,
Ace, in that their margins are generally about 80 to 90%. So
really?
if they're selling something for $20, they're buying it for between $1 and $2.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah. Now,
Mm,
what they have done is, an, um, they will sell to Walmart and Target and Bed Bath and Beyond and Kohl's, but they get those returned at the end of a product life cycle. And so they'll get 30 to 40%. So that, let's say they'll sell 5 million to Walmart. Well, Walmart might return 1.5 million units.
I see. Because they couldn't push them on the shelves.
Right. And so we'll go to our partners, we'll go and we'll buy their closeouts on pennies on the dollar.
Mm,
And therefore we can, you know, um, a copper pan set might be 79.99 on an infomercial, and we're
mm,
selling it for 49.99. So we're saving money. But the list, the companies, they get a royalty off the gross. So they make money if we sell flashlights, sell their product, or sell anybody's product.
I
But they
see.
really, their model, they're not geared to do what we do. It's not a great business model to be able to do what everybody else does. And I believe that one of the reasons why so few e-commerce companies make money
Mm,
is that they are emulating or trying to emulate Amazon,
Mm.
and they're waiting for people to search for their products.
Right.
Okay, and I think that that is essentially a real problem. And I have said that we've kind of, as a nation, we've forgot how to sell.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
if you're just satisfying somebody's demand, you're just waiting. You're not creating that demand. You're just waiting for them to have it in their mind that, oh, I want um, compression socks. Okay.
Right. Right.
Well, and and if I'm going to compete with that, then you go to Amazon and type in compression socks, and you're going to have 1,500 people selling the same thing.
I see. Right. So if you go in that direction, you're crowded out. Whereas if you go and you actively create the demand yourself, you can capitalize and basically capture almost all of it for yourself.
Well, I mean, the real key to what we do, and I have made no secret about this,
Mm.
is that marketers have to own their own media.
Okay.
And to own your own media, to understand that data is actually 21st century media.
Mm.
Data is like potential energy.
Okay.
And a boulder on the top of a mountain is sitting there with potential energy, then needs to be pushed, and then becomes kinetic energy. Well,
Mm.
there's something like potential media. If you
Mm.
have somebody's email and address, and it's waiting there, waiting for action, it's
Mm.
potential media. And then once you actually deploy it with an offer, it becomes kinetic media, if you will.
Mm. I see.
Um, and so my advice to budding marketers
Mm.
is to understand the relationship of owning your own media and marketing your own products.
Mm.
Okay, because we have marginal cost of deploying media is practically zero.
Right.
So, Ace, how much is it going to cost to have you have 1,000 people listen to this podcast versus 1,001 people? That marginal cost is practically zero, if not zero.
It is zero, but yeah, I
Correct.
see what your point
Right.
is.
And so
Mm.
to understand that to to be a marketer in the 21st century, to succeed,
Mm.
one has to understand the relationship of the zero marginal cost of media
Mm.
and being able to market um, within that marginal cost structure.
I
That's
see.
where you can make money.
Right. So my question to you is a few fold on that front. One of which is, what's your conversion rate of the number of people you actually have this potential energy for versus what you've converted kinetically into sales? Like, is a margin, is a ratio on that front half decent? Is it like, it's like, is it shooting fish in a barrel, or is it like, trying to capture a fly with your hands? What's the process like once you've got all these potential customers waiting for you?
Well, it's not as high
Mm.
as if people are raising their hand already asking for you. Remember, we're getting this media from a multitude of sources.
Right.
So the those people that sign up to get web notification
Mm.
every day is high. Those
Right.
people that sign up to get their offers on their phone 3 times a week is very, very high.
Mm.
Those people that on email, it's lower, but
Mm.
your marginal costs are low.
Right.
We've had over 2 million customers
Mm.
for Pulse TV, and we've had about 20 over 25 million people come through our system. So
Oh,
it's a
wow.
lower conversion rate overall,
Right.
but your cost structure,
Mm.
and it's really um, it's really the situation of, if you crush down your cost of failure,
Mm.
then you can succeed.
Because you're convex.
That is, well, that is correct,
Mm.
because the conversions are convex,
Mm.
and so if you can clip your left tail of risk, which
Mm.
means that you really are keeping from being concave,
Right.
right? Then that is the recipe.
Mm.
People, and I find entrepreneurs, and this was my big problem as a budding entrepreneur. We all understand convex returns. As an
Right.
entrepreneur, you get that, okay? But avoiding ruin is much more important,
Mm.
okay? So that you can keep your hook in the water to
Mm.
catch the fish.
Yes.
And I didn't really become really successful until I could clip that left tail and avoid ruin. Now, I've had tremendous convex businesses that made a lot of money, and then it was kind of like a gambler putting all the money in and losing the hand afterwards.
Mm. Mm. I see. I see.
Thanks, Jafar. How would you define anti-fragility?
Um, I define it as um, two um, two qualities. One is that you have to avoid ruin, so you're clipping your left tail, and on the other hand, on the other side, you have convex returns.
Mm.
Okay, so you can't have anti-fragility without clipping your left tail. Okay, um, and I think that this is one of the biggest mistakes that I have encountered with the Real World Risk Institute, people not quite getting that particular idea that convex returns are essential,
Mm.
but just as essential as avoiding ruin. And you need both of those conditions in order to have anti fragility. And then there's, I guess, a third condition, and that is that it's time dependent.
Mm.
So you can be anti-fragile for a time,
Right.
all right,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not forever. We're going to die. Um,
Right.
a forest fire is going to run out of trees.
Right.
So there is a boundary of time, and a lot of times some other points. So um, I always use anti-fragility and use up to a point. Maybe
Right.
that's a practical issue,
Mm.
and I think it deserves um, you know just a lot more emphasis from what we call the tribe.
Right. Right. So if I can rephrase it to see if I understood your point correctly, is that I could be anti-fragile in the current moment, uh, dependent on the ecosystem around me that's dynamic, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that my strategy of maintaining anti-fragility today will be valid tomorrow. Because, for example, if, I just a world-changing event takes place, and all the things that previously did enable you to stay anti-fragile allowed you to survive, while some of your competitors may have been ruined and wiped off. But now a new environment shows up, a new dynamic shows up, and now you still have to change and adapt to that in order to maintain your competitive advantage via anti-fragility. Would that be an accurate summation of what you just stated?
That is really well articulated. And to give you an exact example, is
Mm.
that Pulse TV, we were adding 400,000 new buyers into our data stream, into our deal of the day,
Mm.
for several years. And we were getting those, as I said, from the infomercial industry. So we were derivative of how well the infomercial industry was doing. Well, the infomercial industry started a precipitous decline approximately 9 months ago.
Mm.
And instead of 400,000 a month coming into our system, which gives us, in essence, free customer acquisition. We're acquiring customers at a profit, not at a
Mm.
cost.
Right.
But we went from 400,000 to 75,000. That's over 80% reduction in
Mm.
monthly, let's call it media.
Right.
Okay. And so um, it is forcing us to find new methods
Mm,
of acquiring customers at a break even or a profit. So we need new media sources,
mm.
and that's what we're doing right now.
I see. So in this context of what you just stated, so I imagine you and I had these conversations before about the cost of long-term value, which we both know is sort of a sham sort of metric. And for listeners who don't understand what that means is typically you show up to, like, I'll give you an example of a coffee shop where they may put out an ad, the local area in the newspaper or whatever for that particular region, and the ad will cost $700. And the newspaper people who are selling that ad may say to them, "Hey, listen, if you put out $700 worth of an ad in this local paper, that will attract customers to your store. If you acquire 4 customers and they become your customers for life, and they buy a cup of coffee a day, for the number of days they're going to be drinking the coffee, your cost of acquisition is essentially zero." But you and I both know that that's a fool's errand, because that metric has no real value to it, because it's an assumption of the future reflecting the present. Would that be an accurate area of where you and I had our initial agreement?
That is true. Another way of looking at it is that you place a mortgage
Mm,
on the customer
mm,
when you go negative to acquire him, because
right,
it takes a long time in order to make enough profit to cover that acquisition cost. And
right.
so what has happened in the online, actually in pretty much in the United States across all businesses,
Mm,
they're using more and more lifetime value to justify
mm,
the increased cost of customer acquisition.
mm,
And the danger and the fragility of that mindset is
mm,
that the future doesn't resemble the past, as we know,
right,
and all lifetime calculations are looking in the rearview mirror to develop what the metrics are and what you can afford to acquire a customer.
right.
And let me give you a good example, at least one that might reverberate with your listeners,
Mm,
is that um, the iPhone came out in June of 2007.
mm.
Prior to the iPhone, BlackBerry was, you know, I don't know if you even remember BlackBerry, but okay, but they were the number one phone,
Right.
and they would spend $2,500 to get a customer. Well,
Really?
right, and because they had a good lifetime value model.
Uh,
Well, then comes Apple with iPhone, and it destroyed the lifetime value metrics, because that point forward, the future, it ceased looking like BlackBerry's past and almost put them out of business.
right, right, right. I remember because what I did was this comes down to an agency model problem, right? So the person selling you the ads is selling you a potential future that resembles the past, whereas you know that the future and the past are not going to necessarily coincide. And that's where you and I have the moral, ethical complaint against it, which is to say, look, unless you can guarantee me that the future is going to resemble this, and that for the next foreseeable, let's say 3 years, the cost of acquiring this customer is going to be exactly as it is today, I don't think this is a viable solution. So I took what your point of view was, and I actually flipped the script a little bit, because when I help customers that I help with when it comes to writing, redoing their websites and adding some functionality to it, I take the exact same model, but I narrow the scope of time down to 3 months. I say, okay, look, long lifetime value is a metric that is used as a sleight of hand to get you to fork money over. I'm going to try it a different way. I'm going to give you the lifetime value metric, but I'm going to bound it with 3 months. This way you can test it to see if it's actually working or not. And so your upfront costs are bounded. It's a lot lower for you to get in, to test the water, to see if the strategies that I'm recommending for you actually make sense for your business. And that's actually all in due course, because I was reading your blog post about the whole concept of it. And I realized that the idea is not false. The idea is false if you unbound the time and say, oh, it's perpetual. Would you agree
Well,
with that?
well, it's not just the cost
Mm,
being guaranteed; it's actually the revenue. So the lifetime value is an estimation or an approximation, okay, of how much profit one is going to get from a new customer that is acquired, okay?
Right.
And so your cost structures can go up and down or whatever, but it is what when a marketer is using a lifetime value metric,
Mm.
is he is saying how much of a mortgage can I place upon getting a new customer,
Right.
and that is based upon a projected amount of profit he's going to get in the future,
From
and
that.
that is where there's a tenuous relationship.
Mm.
And so, what I recommend to marketers
Mm.
is that you the further, and by the way, this um, is what Joe Norman would absolutely agree with. The farther you look into the future of it
Mm.
in a complex environment, the more
Mm.
tenuous your predictive abilities are.
Right.
So, the weather, I can give you a pretty good estimation of what the weather is going to be like in 5 minutes from now. Okay.
Right.
But 5 weeks from now, 5 months from now,
Mm.
5 years from now, it becomes ridiculous. And
Right.
so, as a marketer, you have to understand that you are operating in a very complex environment, and so it behooves you to have a shorter runway in
Mm.
whatever forecasting you want to do.
Mm.
And so I say work on a break even analysis. You're
Right.
still projecting,
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
But the runway is closer to your feet here. It's closer to that time, and where I didn't have to do that with Pulse TV at all because we were acquiring customers at a profit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that I didn't have to use lifetime value,
Mm.
but um, and if you really look, the people that are pushing the use of lifetime value as a metric are
Mm.
Google.
Right.
Okay, because they want you to be able to spend more for media to acquire a customer,
Right.
um, and uh, and then the agencies want you to spend more money to acquire a customer because then they have a longer runway themselves.
Right.
And then you have the trades
Mm.
are promoting a lifetime value model
Mm.
because they're subsidized by the Googles and the BS vendors. And then you have the financial industry, which is and companies like Amazon, they don't want to expense customer acquisition. They want to amortize it.
Mm.
They
Mm.
want to spread it out so
Right.
that quite literally um, their financials are going to look better. And so you have a whole ecosystem
Mm.
that is based upon a fraud.
But it can be maintained for a long period of time.
It can be maintained for a very long time, especially when you have venture capitalists
Mm.
and private equity
Mm.
pumping this, okay, pumping this whole notion
Mm.
because, you know, this then feeds into growth at any cost. So,
Right.
um, for us, who every penny that we spend comes out of our pocket, we look at things with a much more jaundiced eye.
Right. 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 I understand what you're saying.
So what's the alternative to lifetime value?
Um, well, we use a break-even analysis or better. So what I want to find out is how long, when I acquire a customer, how long does it take for me to break even on it?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Okay. And so is it going to be on the first order? That's you know, uh, you know, nirvana, okay? Is it going to be in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year? The further you go out into
Mm.
the future, the more tenuous that business is likely to be.
Mm.
Okay.
See, it's funny because that ties into one of the conversations I had yesterday, where the tweet I sent out was about this concept that time burns all assumptions, and so you want to have the minimal amount of assumptions you can get away with, just so that when it does come down time to burn it, you're not standing in the way of the flame, right?
Well, I mean, yes, that's another way of saying that our predictive abilities,
Mm-hmm.
okay, are overwhelmingly flawed. And so, um, look, we all have to forecast,
Right.
but just don't believe them. Okay, so you can project or forecast in war.
Mm.
Okay, and Eisenhower said, yes, as soon as the first shot is fired, it's useless.
Right.
But you want to be able to think about the future,
Mm.
but you want to actually spend more time, ripping away at those assumptions
Mm.
and understanding that we really don't know very much about the future. So epistemic humility
Mm.
is absolutely the most important, or one of the most important qualities of running your business, and to
Mm.
know that you are, you know, we're so flawed, not
Mm.
just with our own characters, but our 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 ability to see forward.
Right. No, I understand. I understand what you're saying in that regard, because what makes this process fascinating is this. So let's say you're a company right now that's in the business of acquiring new customers, and that has two different approaches to it. Because if you're selling something that's real and tangible, your margins are going to be tighter. Your supply chain management has to be a lot better. Your customer service has to be through the roof. Your return process, repairs, i.e., I'm really talking about Tesla in this regard, right? So what ends up happening here is that they sell the great tale, and they push out the car, and then people buy it, and unfortunately, some of them have reported experiences where a repair is delayed for 6 months because the extra parts weren't available for that person to go in and get their car fixed. So that leaves a bitter taste in the customer's mouth. It drags down the value perception of Tesla itself. And this is one of those things where the mindset, and I think you might agree with me on this, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that Elon comes from the software acquisition strategy, which is that software is very easy to fix and easy to send patches up the chain once you've shipped something out, whereas hardware is almost impossible to do so, because once you've sent something out there, you better have tested it through and through, and you better have spare parts ready to go just in case repairs need to be made. So in this regard, I think what's happening here, and I think what you're really honing in on, is that for the longest period of time, business was done without software, in the sense that you actually had real products, you had real margins, you had real costs, you had real acquisition strategies, you had all the face-to-face interactions with customers, and that was great, and that's what we're all used to. And then the software world came into play, especially online, where everything was essentially, here's version 1, here's version 2, and it just kept iterating. And if your version was broken, you just use the newest version, everything was fixed. And so therefore, this delusion sort of seeped into the mass consciousness, so to speak. And their belief was that you can always just keep getting better as long as you keep pushing faster and faster forward. Meanwhile, it's actually done quite the reverse to it, because what's actually happened here is it's driven costs so low that it's allowed a lot of agency, third-party leeches to step into the game and say, hey, we will sell those ads for you. We will acquire those customers for you. But the business model is no longer what it used to be, where if you're a merchant trader in Saudi Arabia, in the 7th century BC, and you had, the Silk Road as your venue, it was pretty much guaranteed that the business you had yesterday was going to be essentially the same kind of business you may have tomorrow. But today the dynamic has changed, and your anti-fragility concept of bounding things in time and space really speaks to that.
Right, and it's an interesting point that you make about uh, the future looked pretty much like the past, in the 7th century, for example.
Right.
And the gentleman who really articulated this, I think, best was Buckminster Fuller, and he spoke about something called the knowledge doubling curve.
Okay.
And so he said approximately 1,000 years ago, it took 1,000 years. I mean, 2,000 years ago rather, it took 1,000 years to double knowledge.
Right.
Okay, and then by the 1900s, okay, it took 100 years to double. By 1950, it took 50 years to double. By the year 2000, it took 10 years to double. And so now at 2019, what is that knowledge doubling curve? And the reason this is important is that, we have data, then information, then knowledge, then wisdom. Okay. So in
Mm,
some ways, change is a function of data and information and knowledge doubling.
mm,
Unfortunately, wisdom doesn't. It doesn't double like, like data. I mean, now there's more data collected every 3 days. It's doubling every 3 days. So this, so the pace of change is so fast, where 1,500 years ago it was slower, and then
mm,
even in 1950, a
mm,
lot of the marketing concepts,
mm,
where you are assuming the future looks like the past. Well, if the ecosystem is not iterating and is not changing very fast,
mm.
then you can get away with it.
Right.
But with today's information, and I believe that change is a function
Mm,
of this data, information, and knowledge.
mm,
Okay,
mm,
and so therefore you become much more susceptible
mm.
to the complex, the cascading effect of that change.
Right, right,
Does,
right.
does that make sense to what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, no, it totally makes sense in the following sense because I look at it this way, right? So I'm a big fan of Buckminster Fuller myself, and one of my favorite quotes from him was that I just invent and then I wait till men who need what I need, who want what I need, come looking for it, right? So in this regard, what you're doing here is you're saying, look, the surface layer of what people see is one thing. The tides that actually generate the change underneath it are nonlinear, and that's what our quote unquote tribe really focuses on. So since we, dive deep once in a while and take a look at the undercurrents, we know what's going to happen on the surface layer. But the vast majority of humanity and their linear way of thinking is basically happily sailing, and they don't see the tsunami sort of coming their way. Whereas you are advocating the process of saying, look, what you see on the surface layer is great, but make sure you consistently keep diving deep to make sure that you can see the changes that are coming that are going to disrupt this process so that you can get out of the water when that tsunami starts to come your way.
Correct. And so, what we do
Mm,
is constantly increase our optionality, okay?
mm-hmm,
Because we don't know where the future is actually going to be. But what we want to do is be more like Barry Sanders, where, okay, you have flexibility and optionality. You're going to go off a right tackle, but you may end up over left end, okay?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Um, and so, you know, uh, one one interesting definition of value is increased options.
mm,
And if you can get, so what I do for a living, actually, personally, is I dream of creating new hypotheses for when I'm wrong. Okay. All right. And so trying to come up with more options for me, because the one thing I believe is that I'm going to be wrong looking forward. So I want to have a lot more options for when I'm wrong. It's not even if I'm wrong, when I'm wrong.
I see.
And by the way, it's kind of unsettling at one point. You have to get really comfortable with uncertainty.
Right.
And um, the one of the fantastic things about the tribe is that
Mm.
we're really always talking about uncertainty, but not. I think too often we talk about it as a intellectual concept,
Mm.
whereas I'm feeling it every single day as an entrepreneur, and I just have a better vocabulary, and I want to give my props to Nassim
Mm.
because he has given me a language to communicate this. So we're talking about the very things that almost every entrepreneur knows, intimately, but cannot express.
Right. 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 Right.
So, how would you reconcile risk, ruin, and uncertainty in relation to optionality?
To reconcile it, I'm not sure I understand the question. Um, the adding optionality, is giving you a way of dealing with whatever happens in the future. I mean, I don't know if you like blues music, but it was an old Chicago blues song.
Mm.
And it was, whatever way the wind blows, it's cool to me. Okay. And so that is kind of my philosophy. If I can construct our tactics and strategies
Mm.
to follow that, well, okay, the infomercial industry is now in a one-way ticket to oblivion, and 80% of our new buyers are gone. Well, how can I make that cool to me? Well, then I need other options. I need other options to create media and to create new data points.
Mm.
Okay. Now, avoiding ruin means that I'm not going to take risks that can lead to ruin. So it's the business version of the precautionary principle. Okay,
Right.
or at least crushed down to a specific point.
Mm.
And I'll tell you that it was my number one problem because I'm actually a risk junkie.
Mm.
Okay, and I would be the guy. I don't play poker any longer, but when I was younger, I did,
Mm.
and I'd be the guy to go all in way too often.
Is it the thrill of the chase for you?
Well, I mean, there's, I don't know what it is, but there's an excitement, adrenaline. And when it comes to business, um, you know, I have this faith
Mm.
that everything is going to be okay if I can, just have time, any time. Okay. Um, and, I remember, I learned meditation. I went
Mm.
to Fairfield, Iowa,
Mm.
and Maharishi International University is in Iowa, and
Mm.
it was a 4-day course. And I knew the instructor who was actually taught by Maharishi,
Mm.
and he was a client of mine when I owned a fulfillment company. And
Mm.
after he taught me and everything, and he said, I just want to tell you, he said, you have more faith as a businessman than any person that I ever met, and I never thought of it like that.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
but that doesn't bode well for clipping your left tail risk. Just
Right. Right.
that left tail risk is really a very rational, saying, okay, how much can I afford to lose? That's not
Right.
a It's not based upon faith. It is, how many chips am I willing to put into the pot?
Right.
And I think that is what I've learned over the years.
You know, what's interesting about that is that I've been involved in multiple businesses and helped out various people with their particular problems. And here's, I think, where you and I have commonalities as follows. See, we like taking risk, but we also know that the risk is what teaches you the best way to assess future opportunities for more risk. Whereas most people, when you put your business idea to them, if they don't hear like this is the foolproof guaranteed plan to making money, they're not really interested because they don't really know that the world doesn't work like that. And for you and me, our approach is like, look, we're going to get into this business, but we can only get into it with this amount of funds or this much time because that's what we're willing to lose. And then hopefully on the upside, if the gain comes, we are better off for it. So we can place multiple bets, whereas most people just want to put all, quote unquote, their eggs in one basket.
Correct. Correct. And so you have to have convexity so that if, you know, let's say you've eliminated risk or not eliminated, lowered it to a tolerable level.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And, but if your upside is not real good, then, it's not an assessment of future risk. It's really more about the lines of if I have convexity, if my idea succeeds.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And if I crush down the cost of failure. Okay. So when I was doing infomercials, it was costing anywhere between $150,000 to $200,000 to get a failure.
Okay.
And then if you get a winner, like we had Riverdance, okay, which was a big hit, okay, well you make millions.
Right.
But the cost of failure, we had 25 failures in a row.
Right.
Okay, so
Yep.
quite literally, we ate up all of the profits that we did with Riverdance, and we gave it back because I didn't clip the left tail risk. And what I said is when we started marketing online, I said that's not going to happen anymore. We're going to crush down the cost of failure so that if we test 500 different products, maybe 25 will become hits.
Right.
One out of 20. But I'm not going to go broke on the 475 that were not hits.
Right. No. You know what's interesting? It kind of ties back to your previous point, which is that sometimes when I speak to people, the argument is like they're like, well, how come you're so sure of what decision you're about to make? And I always remind them, I'm like, it's pretty hard to make a decision if you're unsure, right? If my assumptions are this is going to be wrong, I'm more than likely not to make that decision to start with. And that kind of frame of mindset is sort of entrepreneurial in nature in the sense that we look at it from the point of view of like, okay, there's 8 options here. I don't know which one's going to work. I do know that I want to play in all of them in case one of them does work, but I need to figure out the best way to minimize my costs so that even if all 8 are wrong, that I don't go ruin, right?
Correct.
The ruin state is what we want to always avoid. And I think that's what it is that you've been trying to articulate because of various experiences of changing the way you do business depending on the epoch that we're in.
Correct. Absolutely correct.
So question is this then. So let's imagine it in the following regard, right? So some businesses actually can and do maintain steady state revenue. Sort of like imagine if you opened one of the best apple pie shops that just sold coffee, apple pie, and that's it. That's all you did in some street corner in New York. And that business is steady state because everybody loves apple pie. And if your coffee's half decent, you're always going to get the same number of customers. And the market sort of prices all that in, and there's no real quote unquote growth for that business. Whereas what people want in the modern day society is they want explosive growth, and explosive growth can only come if there's no predictability priced in, which is why when they look at Amazon, there's this constant assumption that in the future some sort of explosive growth is coming, but in the present they'll just keep giving them really, really cheap money so they can go and buy whole other businesses and quote unquote disrupt other industries. What's your take?
Well, there's a lot wrapped into what your question was articulated. The first issue is one of growth. Okay, one can have convexity without complete exponential growth. I think that an apple pie shop, okay, its relationship to its cost to its revenue. I think it can be linear, somewhat flat, but I'm not a fan of growth at any cost.
Mm.
Okay, now that the 21st century, from the .com forward,
Mm.
okay, we've been hooked on growth, 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 without any kind of fundamental, profitability baked in.
Mm.
And if you want to talk, profitability is Lindy. This
Mm.
growth at any cost is not. And I think that it is, disastrous for most companies, almost all. Okay, WeWork, that is the largest real estate holder in the United States right now.
Mm.
They are, they've grown, 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 and they're bleeding, 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 bleeding. Okay,
Right.
so I, I am somewhat very skeptical about the hockey stick growth
Mm.
without profit. If
Right.
you're going to have profit, real profit, and
Mm.
not creative accounting profit, then knock yourself out. But I don't see that. Um, Elon Musk comes from the growth, growth, growth. But when he was at PayPal,
Mm.
PayPal had hockey stick growth and real profits.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
but he has not recreated that in anything else
Right. Right. Right.
because
Right.
because he has not associated real profits with growth. He's become too growth centered. Okay, and he's trying to apply the lessons that he learned at PayPal, but they are not fully recognized lessons. So I'm not a big fan of his, as you probably know.
I have noticed. So the way I so the way I reconcile that is like I actually I like Elon as a person in the sense like I think he's very creative and he's somebody who needs a Tim Cook in his life to make it work. However, I wouldn't bet on him either, right? In the sense that I do what Paul, our mutual friend, says is that I just let it trade. I watch it. I wouldn't buy a Tesla. I wouldn't buy Tesla stock, but I wouldn't outright bet against them either. So it's one of those things where I'm like, you know what? There's a lot of assumptions built into this particular person's approach to doing business. And I think you and I sort of vibe with it on this front, which is that a lot of these, and this word really bothers me, it's this concept of quote unquote visionary. And a visionary must have a plan that's 200 years down the road, and we must, colonize the universe and all that stuff, which is fine. It's just not something you could run a business off of, which is to say, look, I'll run this business at a loss, but I'll generate enough revenue. And in the process, what I'm really hoping for is to put out all my competitors so that eventually I can jack the rates up and I can turn a profit. And I think that's the only viable way that I see some of these business practices, mapping itself onto reality, which is that if you keep undercutting everybody as I think the first problem here came out with the idea of a loss leader, which is to sell gum at a loss at the front of the checkout in the hopes that somebody will pick up some, I don't know, some tabloid magazine or whatever. And in the process, that gum allows you to go and fork on 3 or 4 other purchases. It really opened the door to this idea that if we just chase revenue, eventually we'll put our competitors out of business, and then we can own that market. Whereas I
Well,
think
I mean, it's a nice analogy, except that the the transaction of
Mm.
giving away the gum for the for buying 3 other things, they're making a profit right then. It's not going forward. Now the razor blade analogy, where I'm going to lose money selling the razor, but I'm going to make it up, over time.
Mm.
Okay. Well, you figure, well, how many months of is it going to take for Gillette
Mm.
to uh, you know to, to to get back the cost of the razor because they're essentially giving it away. And interestingly enough, Gillette, reported terrible earnings because of the Dollar Shave Club. Okay, because there's and what they said is that millennials are not shaving like their parents did. And so they're not using much razor. So a lot of things change. And Gillette is a 130-year-old company, and they were still acting as if they're the future looks like the past. But I know all three of my millennial sons, they have various stages of 5-day beard, 7-day beard, 10-day beards. Okay.
Right, right. But all that would do, if you really think about it, is if you project that into your future business, if you're running a razor company, it doesn't mean they stopped shaving completely. It just means that the rate against which you can expect renewals is a lot lower. So therefore, adapt your cost model to say, okay, since this is happening, we need to just reduce costs on this front so that we can still maintain profitability. But from what you're stating here, it sounds like they've basically missed that boat and they've just continued to push the way they used to without having a reality check come back in until that last earnings came through, right?
Right. And then it's a self-feeding loop. So they're going to say, oh, I can't afford as much money to spend to acquire a new customer, so I'm going to spend less, and therefore I have less new customers, and so it actually is now bending back. So they're becoming really concave because they're getting less new customers, and it's taking longer to break even because of people are shaving less. So they've got a couple of negatives. But I mean I'm not an expert in that particular industry. But the issues are the same across just about all domains. So it's not, while we're talking about entrepreneurship, which is, where I love, the issues are the same whether you're a surgeon or, you're talking about health with, I hope you get Guru to be on your podcast, for example.
Yeah, we're planning it.
Okay, so I mean, there's a lot of, the concepts are the same across all domains, which is, by the way, which is why I've gone to the Real World Risk Institute probably more than anybody else.
Yeah, well, you are one of the more requested for guests because from what I hear, I've never attended myself, is that you're the one who always voices disagreement as soon as anybody says something that doesn't rub you the right way, which is kind of like, that's the kind of person I like talking to, which is that if you...
Well, you know what, actually, I think what it is that I'm on a war against positive assertions. Okay, so because almost all of our positive assertions, see, I'm really comfortable with via negativa,
Right.
and the whole idea of critique, which is the essence via negativa and critique, and to dissect. It doesn't matter whether it be politics, war, religion, to business. I seem to gravitate towards what's messed up than what's right. And so, the instructors, whether it be Joe, by the way, is a magnificent instructor. I am telling you, he is phenomenal. And I mean, of course, Nassim is too, but whenever there's a positive assertion, I'm the one kicking the tires saying, well, how certain are you of this?
Right.
Right? And when you start to kick the tires, you find out that actually, we're not certain about much.
Right. Right. You know what? It's funny, the concept of via negativa. I just, as you were talking about it, it kind of clicked in my mind with the earlier statement with regards to time burns all assumptions, right? So if you are via negativa and you're strong on that front, the assumptions you carry with you forward are few and far between. And hopefully that increases your odds of survival. And so I think what makes this interesting and particular to the tribe is as follows, right? So most people are looking for ways to maximize quote unquote profit or revenue or whatever the case may be. Market share is always a big one, especially in the tech world. But you and I come at it from the point of view of that if you survive long enough, your competitors who chased the wrong things eventually go out of business, and then you can capitalize much more effectively because you're in a position to do so, versus everybody else's approach, which is revenue, revenue, revenue. No, there's no actual consideration towards profit, and only in a world where interest rates are so low can this actually even be considered a viable quote unquote strategy.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Um, the the idea that I keep coming back to crushing down the cost of failure, and then the hits will take care of itself.
Mm.
I'm not an optimizer. I don't. I believe that those that want to maximize efficiency,
Mm.
when it comes to human processes, I think that you can, there's a reason we have two lungs, reason we have two kidneys.
Mm.
Um,
Only had two brains.
Correct. And so, right. And so what happens is that I don't really spend much time trying to optimize
Mm.
and maximize profits. I have a business model in mind that automatically will, should we find hits.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I obsess about how can we test more,
Mm.
test more products, and
Mm.
B, how can I get more media at zero marginal cost? If I can
Right.
take care of those two things,
Mm.
then I know that the model is convex, and that's fine. But I don't spend a whole lot of time,
Mm.
optimizing or talking about efficiency.
Mm.
We have customer service in house.
Mm.
We don't want our people to be on the phone. You know, we if they're on the phones more than 70% of the time,
Mm.
we've got a problem. There's no elastic. Okay,
Right.
you need to give, you need to be able to breathe. Okay.
Right. 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 No, I hear you. And what's interesting is as follows, right? So for me, I try to look at businesses and I try to find people who do generalized set of ideas applied across the board. And in the MBA stream of thought, and I almost went to do my MBA. Luckily, I was smart enough to start a company instead and learned the hard way how business actually works. The thing that I found interesting was that both schools, at Ruri and the MBA at Harvard or Wharton, try to teach two ideas, right? So each one is like, here's a set of ideas that works across all businesses. Ruri's idea is actually quite the opposite. What it says is these are the ideas that definitely won't work across all businesses. And one focuses on how to avoid ruin, the other one focuses on how to become really, really rich. And you could instantly tell which one is going to survive the Lindy test of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think your obsession with clipping the left tail and paying attention to how risk can actually destroy any beautiful business plan you may have had, any projections you may have wanted, sort of goes back to Mike Tyson's concept that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right?
Correct. Correct.
So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, and I know that you code. A lot of coders don't like me very much, but
I love you. This is the
but I mean, Bill Gates said if you apply, I'm going to paraphrase him, but if you apply these processes of efficiency to inefficient processes,
Mm.
okay, you're gonna that are inherently inefficient,
Mm.
you're going to make it worse. Okay, there's certain things that you can, optimize and make things more efficient. But I'm really a redundancy guy. That's what I think a lot about. So which is kind of almost opposite of efficiency.
You know what's interesting about that? Software developers come in two flavors, right? So there are the quote unquote developers and there's the engineers. And I'll give you the distinction between the two. And the distinction is that if you write code that you use, you're a developer. If you write code that everybody uses over time, you're an engineer, because now people depend on what it is your code was supposed to do. And so therefore you have to put a little bit more thought into it to make sure that it doesn't disrupt the flow of everybody else's usage of code. And here's what makes that interesting. So as you learn fundamentals, because I work with younger software developers all the time, or people just starting out, and they always ask me, Ace, how do I get good at this job? And how do I do this, that, and how do I land that job that pays X thousands of dollars per year? And I always tell them the same thing. I'm like, the fundamentals of computer science have been the same since Alan Turing and John von Neumann kind of created it. Those didn't change. What changes is what you see on the surface and how it kind of looks prettier and all that. But the bottom layer stuff of it is almost always so statically slow in terms of how it moves, because you're constrained by the complexity of the real world. The laws of physics are not going to bend and yield to your desire to make things, quote unquote, hockey stick growth. There's a concept in computer science called Amdahl's law, which is that if you take a process and you want it to do some sort of computation on it, there's going to be a bottleneck of something where it can only be done serially. The stuff that you could do in parallel, sure, you can actually make it faster if you just take the data, chunk it out, and put it on multiple computers and have all the computers do the computation at the same time, and then take all the results and aggregate it and spit out the response, which is sort of what these big data analysis engines are all about. But even within that constraint, it doesn't mean you have a free-for-all hand to do whatever it is you want to do, because individually inside one of those computers, there's going to be one calculation that's going to slow everything down to the point where it's going to take 90% of the cost of your quote-unquote speed up, and it's going to swallow it whole. And so the people who understand that understand exactly what it is you just said, which is that, and this is where I get really into sort of quote-unquote Twitter disputes with some of my friends who are, and I'm definitely in their camp, don't get it twisted, I'm a software developer through and through, but this idea that, oh, machine learning is going to lead to like artificial intelligence and all that stuff, and I always remind them that, listen, when databases came into existence, that's like we discovered a horse, right? Before that, we were all walking. Now that we got machine learning, that's like we discovered an airplane. But artificial intelligence, that's like flying to Alpha Centauri, right? The airplane that you have, the model that you've created that's giving you some new capabilities, still has to work within the boundaries of the Earth. It cannot, an airplane, no matter how good it is not going to fly into space, right? So the mania, I think the thing that makes you sort of almost instinctively distrust all the media and the hype that goes around the tech world is very much rooted in the reality of looking at what is possible versus what's marketed as possible. And I think those two things is what rubs you the wrong way.
Yeah, also, there are different domains. Okay, as an engineer, okay, I think engineers are great at working with bridges. Okay, and they're not really good with. Are we still on?
Yeah, we're still on.
Okay, all right. Engineers are not real good in human endeavors that are, whether it be sales and marketing to, they want to apply the same kind of processes of a bridge or physics or to human issues, and it's kind of like a reductionism that we that human activity does not yield to. Okay, so that our friend Trishank and I we disagree because no there's no limitation in the human domain because basically I'm not a philosophical materialist. Okay, so I think that there's something different in the human domain that doesn't allow us to apply the same kind of engineering processes to.
Right. Well, I see in that regard, I have a foot in both camps, and I can tell you where I can bridge sort of the divide between where you stand and where Trishank stands. I'm not speaking on his behalf, but I'm sort of speaking in general terms. But the thing is, the argument from Trishank's camp and that whole side of it is that, yes, the problem that you're describing is very, very complex and it's difficult to do. But all you have to do is get it right once. And once you get it right, then it sort of opens the door open to almost all the other possibilities that we're always dreaming of. So that's where the hang up tends to be, which is that you're right, the odds are low, the odds are very difficult in the sense of the mountains we have to climb and the algorithms we have to find and all the stuff that needs to be done. But we just have to get it right once. And that's where I think the hang up is. It's that there's no reconciliation between people wanting it to be everything and people saying it can't be everything. And that's why I have a foot in both camps, because I can appreciate both sides of that argument.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
So in that regard, let's talk about this this idea of how you use social media. Considering you spoke about media in general being a way to tap into your customer base, do you apply those same principles to social media, or do you just leave that as a separate beast all on its own?
Well, if we talk about me personally,
Mm-hmm.
okay, no, I don't use social media for business, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, um, I communicate. I use it to connect with the tribe. I deactivated my Facebook account. I have an Instagram account, but I've never used it.
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn, I have it, but I don't use that. Now, we do own a data company,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And we do have in here our marketing department will go and advertise on Facebook and Google um, and Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And our data company has the ability to identify people who visit our website that don't fill out anything by using a cookie.
Okay.
We identify a cookie on a browser, and actually we've filed for a patent on this. So everybody understands what web retargeting is, and that
Okay.
is you go to Chevy.com and all of a sudden you're on Yahoo or Facebook, and the ad follows you where you're going.
Right.
But it's about 8 or 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
What we did was take it to the next step, and we have a database of 364 million U.S. emails, and this is only good for the U.S.,
Mm-hmm.
married to about 108 million U.S. households.
Mm-hmm.
And we put a pixel on Pulse TV,
Mm-hmm.
and we identify and we suppress all the buyers and all the emails that we already have, and we look for a cookie on the browser.
Mm-hmm.
Once we find that,
Mm-hmm.
it goes to it's matched against this 364 million. And so we know that they're on our site. We know what page they landed on, and then we can retarget them what they did. So we don't find social media very successful on its own, but when we layer in owning, so you could pay $1 a click,
Mm-hmm.
but we own this huge data, and we had about 8 to 10 million records a month,
Right.
and they come from 12,000 different websites in the U.S.
Okay.
So we can identify these people for pennies,
Mm-hmm.
whereas you're paying $1 for a click. And then we
Right.
spun that after doing that for a year and a half, we spun it out into its own company
Okay.
to offer it to other marketers.
I see. I see. So the question I have on that front is that now that there's a big so that model that you just described is obviously an effective strategy to deploy technical know-how in order to sort
Correct.
of follow customers around and get their targets. But now that it seems like there's a tide of privacy being shifted in the sense that people are not necessarily quite comfortable with this process. So how do you clip your left tail, knowing that that's where the direction is going? What are you going to do to make sure that you can still profit off the investment you made in that company, while in the face of being in an environment where everybody's kind of shifting away from that process?
Well, I mean, the company has already broken through and replenished and paid back all the money it cost to start. So
Okay.
it's also cash flow positive. So it's already got a clip left tail, but um, the um, the European standard, the GDPR, which is
Yeah.
the privacy laws,
Yeah.
which are coming. California in January starts that, and quite literally, what all the European companies are, you need to get positive, uh, you need to get positive agreement that they
Yeah.
um, will follow, that agree to your cookie policy,
Hmm.
and almost everybody gives it anyway.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so that's one. But two, if the privacy laws made it illegal,
Mm.
okay, then we would just shut it down. Okay, and so we're not at risk of it's there's no concave
Mm.
issue.
Mm.
Okay, and Google. See the big guys: Amazon, Google, Apple, Facebook,
Mm.
Twitter. They have all your email, and
Right.
they could give the marketer the email address, but they don't.
Mm.
They use that data. They
Mm.
use that data for their own selling of advertising. So
Right.
the fact that we figured a way out to do this without them,
Mm.
okay, we're not doing anything that they don't do.
Right.
So Gmail, you know, does exactly what we do. They're using first party data, they say.
Mm.
We're using third party data.
Right.
But you know, there are some companies that will not do what we're doing, and that's they're leaving huge amounts of money on the table. I mean, huge amounts of money on the table. But they think it's creepy, and I get it.
Mm.
I mean, I thought web retargeting, and I still do.
Mm.
It is creepy, but it's extremely effective.
Mm. So how do you reconcile the so let's put our business caps aside for a second. Let's put on the philosophical hat and ask you the following question: how do you reconcile the charge that would be laid at your feet on this front to say that you're basically participating in the surveillance capitalism society, and you are but another venue for which to follow people around and like you said, it's creepy. But how do you I get the money that's on the table, and you're trying to maximize your profit on that front when you can. But how do you like where do you land on that particular front? Because you and I have had discussions about a different particular topic that revolves around this, and that was related to the state. But how to deal with the ethical dilemma of should
Yeah.
you do this,
All
right?
right. Yeah. The key for me,
Mm.
okay, and the difference between state surveillance and this is that every single one
Mm.
of the people have given permission. So
Mm.
remember I said they go 12,000 websites?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So they went to, let's say they went to sweepstakes.com,
Mm-hmm.
or they went to mortgagecalculator.com, and they
Mm-hmm.
give them all this information,
Mm-hmm.
and then they give them that information precisely. It's free,
Right.
quote, and I'm going to put that in quotation mark, but it's free to the extent that the terms and services gives those websites, these 12,000 websites, the right to sell, rent, or send third-party offers to.
Okay.
Okay.
I see. I
Right?
see.
And so ours is permission based,
Mm.
even though Joe Smith in Paducah, Kentucky
Mm.
didn't remember going to paydayloans.com, filling
Mm.
it out, and giving this permission, and it's been sold. But the other thing is that when somebody comes so through that process, and then they come to Pulse TV
Mm.
website, well, they've given permission there, and then there's some kind of affinity. We don't mail those 364 million people unless
Mm.
they come to our site.
Right, 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 right. I see
So
what you mean.
they've given permission, and they've given us, they're visiting our website, and we know what they visited. Do I still think it's creepy? Yes, I do. Okay. But um, the you know the state surveillance is is not even, there's no permission there.
Mm.
Okay, and with Google, all the major competitors out there, they do this. That doesn't cut muster in the ethical dimension. Just because Google does it doesn't mean that it becomes reasonable. But they have given us permission.
Right, right. So the only pushback I can give on that front, and I'm just playing devil's advocate, so
Sure.
please bear in mind this is not meant to be a pointed disregard of your previous statements, but the following is the question I'd ask is, even though they did give permission, which is valid and true, the real question is, are they even informed enough to know what kind of permissions they gave? Well, you and I both know what's happening on the other side of that transaction. They have almost zero clue.
Yeah.
So in regard,
I mean, and that's a fair point. Is giving consent and giving informed consent are two different things.
right.
Okay, and um, you know, it certainly grinds against it. I think what's going to happen very soon because of
Mm,
the California privacy laws in January.
mm,
Okay, we're going to get um, informed consent now,
mm.
starting in January.
Okay. Okay.
But I mean, your point's well taken, and I can say that you know, you know, there's not a great um, ethical defense
Mm.
other than this weasel clause, on 12,000 websites that nobody ever reads.
No, I hear you. I hear you. So I'll relay a story for you that you may find interesting on this front. So a few years ago, um, Steve Jobs had just announced the ability to put ads in free apps on the iPhone. And they had just announced this particular set of ideas. And I emailed them and I said, hey, listen, you're doing exactly what everybody else does, which is you're basically spraying and praying for a result, right? In the sense that you hope that these ads that you're going to bring onto your platform are going to be valuable enough that they can actually pay back the developers for engaging in allowing those ads to be on your device. And his response, which I found, I didn't expect he's going to read that email, let alone respond to me, but he responded to me and he said, what do you propose as an ultimate solution? And to this day, I really haven't come across a valid way to deal with that problem in the following regards. Because to me, a free ad for something I don't want is irrelevant, whereas an ad that targets exactly what I'm looking for is much more relevant. So the problem is a company that sits in the business of selling ads, i.e., Facebook or Google, are going to be primed to deliver that. Whereas a company like Apple, it's not even in their DNA to attempt to solve that kind of problem, which is why I found it interesting that now they're encouraging all their app developers, and I used to be one who was working with a couple of these companies and hope to do so again in the future. Is the argument is please sell your product and add a subscription model to it so that you can have recurring revenue, so you don't have to resort to tracking customers and selling their data to third-party vendors. And third party has a wide definition. It can only mean governments, right? So.
Well, sure. I mean, Choice Point, they're a large data company that their number one client is the NSA. So
Right.
and they send data. But you bring up an interesting point about targeting, by the way,
Mm,
and I'm not a big targeter,
mm,
and I'll tell you why.
okay.
Because as marginal costs go down to zero,
Mm,
it negates the necessity to target. So when I was in the direct to consumer catalog business and I was mailing out a catalog to a consumer, it was
mm,
costing about $1.25 to $1.50 to get a catalog into that consumer's hand. Now um, it's costing me 4 pennies to reach 1,000 people.
mm,
So what I've asked several people
mm,
this question. I've talked to a lot of marketers who talk about targeting. I said, if you could reach 7 billion people on the planet
mm,
free,
mm,
or reach the 100,000 people most likely to buy from you but pay $10,000. Which one would you do?
Right.
Well,
Right.
those 100,000 people are subsumed in the 7 billion or whatever, right?
Right. Right.
And almost everybody says, well, I want to do targeting. Okay? And I said, well, look, as targeting, as your marginal costs go down, the
Mm,
need for targeting goes down.
right.
And that's why I bring to marketers and entrepreneurs to understand the whole idea of what zero marginal costs mean to your business and what are they. Okay, the cost of serving an extra banner on your website is zero.
Mm,
Okay, to serve an extra page view is so close to zero. I'm going to call it zero. But I mean, 4 pennies to reach 1,000 people. That's what our deployment costs are because we deploy internally.
right.
So you know, and I will tell you that if you want to sell me something,
Mm,
well, you want to be able to hit my wife, not me. Okay, you know,
right.
so at best you should do fuzzy targeting. You want to
Mm,
target around it, but I will. While I understand what you're saying, that you may find an ad, you personally may find an ad that is geared towards your interest, with
mm,
more interest and
mm,
more interesting for sure.
mm.
Okay, and maybe get irritated for getting, some, you know, some athlete's foot powder. Okay,
Right.
but um, this ties into what we do by trying to create demand, and
Right.
we know that we can do that only because we have such a low cost of media.
Right. Right. Right.
So it comes almost full circle in terms of that philosophy. But
Mm.
so I don't talk very much about targeting
Mm.
except anti-targeting.
So how would you counter Rory's point of sending a strong signal versus a cheap message?
Well, if I would argue that if, let me go to the asymptote, something that costs zero,
Mm.
I would opt to send that then a strong targeted message every any time, because it's based upon what I don't know. I don't know what you're interested in, when you're interested in it, or whatever. And
Mm.
then I'm making the assumption that this is a strong signal to Ace or to you, Ember, or to,
Mm-hmm.
I'm making, it's much more humble to do it the way I'm saying. Saying,
Mm.
look, it's not based upon what I know. It's actually based upon what I don't know.
Mm.
Okay. And I don't know what you're doing, when you're doing it, what time or whatever. So I spend all of the time trying to crush down those costs to get to as close to zero marginal cost as I can,
Mm.
because I really don't have enough smarts to target.
Okay. Okay. I'll give you an example of where I think the future may be going. It's not there yet, but I think this is where it's going. So somebody like myself, I have my own network at home that I configure, my own DNS router, my own gateway, my own switches, my own access points, all that stuff. And one of the things I do on my gateway is I deploy a strategy that every night it goes to GitHub and it actually pulls down the list of all the ad servers on the planet, because people aggregate those, and it brings it down to my machine. And so anybody at my house, when they visit any kind of website, the request gets sent out to the web. The website sends back the content I'm interested in, and they also send back all those ads from all those particular networks that serve these ads. But the minute they hit my gateway just says, "Cool, you ads go here on the right side lane, left on the left lane, all the content goes back to the devices, and none of the devices see any of the ads." And I
Mm-hmm.
think what's been happening there is that the the revulsion towards being constantly drowned in various forms of advertising for the sake of generating demand, as you've stated, is creating a stronger backlash that may be um, gaining momentum as we go forward. And so my question to you in this regard is, I get your point, which is that you have almost zero cost of doing this, but eventually, aren't you just risking really upsetting your customers because you're constantly chasing down these pathways of aggregating data from pixels, like you stated, or tracking cookies, and eventually you become the target of malignment on the internet, so to speak, and then that damages your reputation, it damages your brand, it damages all the other things that you've built up over time. So how do you clip against that left tail?
Um, well, we get we measure how many complaints per thousand that we send out.
Okay.
Okay? And because we're so aggressive, and we get about 4 complaints per thousand.
Okay.
Okay, which is considerably higher than those that opt in.
Right.
When they opt in, we're getting 1 per thousand
I see.
complaint.
Okay.
Okay, and what happens is that I think that just like we have an overwhelming amount of advertising. We're over advertised. Okay.
Right. Right.
And is it are we on the horizon of a an advertising apocalypse?
Hmm.
I think that not. I think not. I don't think that the internet works without it. I mean,
Hmm.
you're not going to go to paid. People are overwhelmed. Now, what's going to happen is that as effectiveness goes down,
Hmm.
okay, all right, as effectiveness goes down, um, then you'll find a lot of changes. But for us, okay, I don't really obsess too much about effectiveness. I'm working on the cost. I find that 99% of the people are working on the other side. They want
Hmm.
to make their ads more effective.
Hmm.
Okay, and
Hmm.
I think they've got more of a problem.
Hmm. Right. Right. Because they're chasing the wrong side of that equation.
They're chasing the wrong side. Now, I just don't see. I just don't see. Um, you know, an advertising free internet.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I mean, I hope we get to that state one day because I'll be honest with you, because one of the side effects of that particular problem that you just described is that the internet is not really a public square, so to speak. It's like when you jump on the Twitter to talk to the crew, we're really not free to speak to the crew as we see fit. We're basically on their network, and if they decide that our opinions, because we tend to be apolitical in nature in the sense that we're outside the left versus right elitist point of view. We're more about the adapt and survive, to borrow a phrase from Mike. If we decide one day that we're no longer able to come onto their platform, we really don't have any kind of recourse in that regard because essentially the service has been given to us for free. So there's this hidden cost that's built into the internet from day one.
Look, I think that there is just like there's basic, there's free TV and cable TV that you pay for. Okay, I could see us if we wanted to have a tribe forum, and if somebody wanted to create a tribe forum,
Mm-hmm.
and in this forum, we'd have a few 100,000 people from the tribe, would what percentage would pay $10 a year?
Right, right, right. I see what you're saying.
Okay, now I think that you'd find that you're going to have pockets. I mean, the Wall Street Journal is a successful pay model. The Wall
Right.
Street Journal is. But the Guardian is not, or very few. The Boston Globe is not. New York Times is not very successful with their pay model. But you know, they're going to be few and far between. But I think that using us, and we would be much more free to say whatever it is that we want because the tribe is not a politically correct group.
To say the least.
Right? Right? And I'm making up $10. Maybe it's $5. Maybe it's $2. I don't know.
Right, right. Well, you know what's interesting about that is I was thinking about that same model because Apple just released their new Apple Plus service, content and whatnot. And they're essentially almost giving it away. But I thought about it, and it kind of hits back to what you just stated, which is that content being generated for consumption is very difficult to monetize for the following reason. Let's say I put together a really, really, really amazing show, and I get the best director and the best actors and all the people involved, and it's a class A production. We put it together, and I charge you and I charge Ember money to watch it, and you guys watch it. As soon as you're done watching it, I can't charge you to watch it again. You see what I'm saying? So the reason why I think some of these websites generate revenue and money and profit is because the content that they're streaming, in the sense of the ideas that they're pushing out there, are ideas that are of constant value, and they're renewed and they're fresh. And some of them are just basically stale talking political points, which is why the numbers may not reflect, because like one paywall system for the Guardian does not reflect what the Wall Street Journal is trying to really focus on. So I think that kind of tension between the content you're generating online versus the business that you have that's consistently necessary, i.e., if you sell razors, you're going to need razors. If you sell political talking points, you may be hot for a while, but eventually you'll become stale, right? So there's this knowing the boundaries of how to reconcile which business model you're really, which table you're actually sitting at when you're playing your cards, so you know what bets to place, and more importantly, which table you should just really walk away from. What is your take on that?
Well, I mean, there's a freemium model, or you get free, and then you upsell. Medium, for example, you get X number of free articles, and then they want to charge you $5 a month. For me, we tried. We actually tried. We owned, and we still own a newsletter called Bizarre News. Okay,
Okay.
and it was extremely popular back in the year 2000. And we had 240,000 subscribers that were
Oh,
getting this 3 times a week and via email. And then we tried to upsell them into a premium Bizarre News. Okay,
right.
all right, and we got like 1% what converted. Okay, and that's it. And so we've tried that, and that was one of our more popular newsletters or evenings, and we still publish it to this day. Um, you know, it's been nonstop published, since 1998, I think it was.
I would have thought since Twitter came into existence that the bizarre news business would have been taken over by Twitter for on your behalf.
Right. So, for us, we monetize it with our own ads, and we have a company called Power Inbox that puts ads inside it. So it doesn't make a whole lot, but it probably averages about $1.50 a thousand.
Mm,
But the cost are 4 pennies a thousand, so it makes
right,
money.
right, right. It does make money.
Yeah, but not much.
All right. So, what are some tips you could give some budding entrepreneurs?
Okay. One, um, certainly one has to um, think of ruin first. Okay. Avoid ruin. Okay. Two, there is no how-to tutorial that you can, follow. It's almost like, you know, it's very idiosyncratic to the entrepreneur. Three, one has to have overwhelming passion because there's going to be ups and downs. Okay, I don't think that you can actually learn entrepreneurship. It's almost like uh, becoming a priest. It's like a calling.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's
All
true.
right. And maybe that's where my faith comes in. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, you have to be able, if you're um, if you're a man, you better have the right kind of wife. If you are a woman, you better have the right kind of husband.
Yep, that's
Okay.
true.
Because there are going to be a lot of times that you're not fully engaged at home while you're obsessing about your business. Okay.
Right.
And I've been, fortunate. I've been married 32 years, and she's a saint. Okay, she's a saint. Okay. Um, Other practical advice is go ahead and make your projections and forecasts and build your model. Just
Mm,
don't believe them.
mm.
Okay. And that's absolutely critical because the more you believe in your own model, the more at risk you really are.
Okay.
That's off the top of my head.
Right. Because if you marry your model, you are unable to go on dates with reality, right?
There you. Oh, I like that. Oh, oh, wow. I
I
like
thought
that a
you
lot.
would. So the question,
I'm going to steal that one.
by all means, by all means,
I'll footnote you, Ace.
I appreciate the shout out. The question I have for you on that front is as follows, right? So, what do you think is the thing that really distinguishes a good entrepreneur from a great entrepreneur? Because there are good ones and somehow there are great ones. What in your mind makes a good one great? Is it that they just have a little bit more tolerance for uncertainty, or is it that they do? Is it that there's another variable at play that we haven't really uncovered here yet?
Yeah, yeah. Going from good to great um, is, it's really difficult. Okay, and Einstein was asked, where do ideas come from? And he pointed to the sky and shrugged his shoulder and said, from God.
Right,
Now he is agnostic, if not atheist, okay?
right.
But where do ideas come from? The great entrepreneurs iterate and generate new hypotheses as the complex environment unfolds.
Mm,
And it is the most difficult quality to have. Um, I just posted a couple of days ago an essay that General Patton, well, he was a major at the time, and he spoke of inspiration. Now, he was deeply religious. Now, an inspiration is a great word. Inspire means to breathe into. It is the I guess the breath of God goes inside. It's very, very much what Einstein was talking about.
mm,
But to be able to generate hypothesis after
mm,
hypothesis after hypothesis, you see, Joe Norman is an expert in evolution, and part of evolution is a never-ending iteration of mutations.
mm,
Okay, it's not thoughtful iteration. Well,
mm,
as an entrepreneur, we introduce our own thought to mutate our company. Go from good to great, you have to be able to generate and mutate and create new hypotheses to
mm,
test.
mm.
Okay? And that nobody knows where that comes from. Okay, but people Steve Jobs was one of the most brilliant people you could find. Okay, and he meditated a lot, so
Mm,
he thought that his ideas came from reaching this universal field. Okay, um, it's very similar to throne mysticism, where the whole idea of seventh heaven, okay, seven layers of consciousness,
mm,
where Steve Jobs believed that as you meditate, you dive deep down,
Mm.
and that's where new ideas are formed. And this was his idea, and that's what a lot of meditators believe as well. I don't know whether it be, God, whether it be reaching what's called the universal field or
Mm.
whatever. Okay, but it's nebulous,
Mm.
that's for sure. But that intangible quality, and it's intangible,
Right.
is what moves you from good to great.
Right. Well, see, I look at that, and I'm a big fan of uh, Sufi Islam and the mystic poets of
Yes,
Persia. And so for me, the idea that I think I've been trying to really convey is that this idea people have is that heaven is beneath you and hell is above you. And I think more like hell is in front of you, but if you walk through it, you can get to heaven. And the great idea is that weight on the other side of it is essentially what the entrepreneur tries to do, in the sense that the way they pull the world forward is they go through the hell of, as you said, diving deep, whatever that may be, meditative state, walks and whatnot. And then when they get to the other side, they see something that they think, oh, this connects all these dots, and they pull it back. And when they bring it back to everybody else, it seems obvious after they've shown you how it looks,
that's
right?
correct. Correct. Yeah, it's always obvious in the rearview mirror.
As hindsight is 2020 for a very specific reason, right?
Right.
Which is hilarious because the contrast to that is the future is opaque. So if you that sort of ties everything that we've always been revolving around. I think one of the reasons, and I'll give you a story of this. The podcast here was really just an idea that I wanted somebody else to take over. I was like, listen, I listen to these podcasts. I'm not necessarily happy with the content, but the stuff I'm interested in, i.e., uncertainty, entrepreneurship, software development, um, poetry, mysticism, all this other stuff, nobody really talks about. And I put it out there, and it didn't go anywhere until you responded to it. I think it was kind of, slowly gaining steam with some of the guys, and then you sort of mentioned how, people misunderstand the concept of antifragility, and then when you mentioned it, it kind of got more retweets with the crew, and all of a sudden, I'm not sure who it was, but somebody hit me back and said, well, why don't you put your money where your mouth is, or why don't you start this thing? And I did exactly what you did, which is that, we're recording these things on Skype. It doesn't have to be an expensive process. And I don't really care about the number of subscribers on YouTube or any other media, because for me, it's like, well, I enjoy these conversations, and Ember enjoys these conversations. And I think our guests enjoy the conversations. We record all this, we dump it onto all the particular platforms that people can enjoy. And it just started to gain kind of a life of its own. And none of it was planned in that regard. I didn't say, oh, on this day we're going to get Jaffer, and then on that day we're going to get Joe, and because everybody was sort of up in the air at the point, right? So it kind of it leads into that direction that you were talking about, which was that we didn't go out and invest a lot of money in making this podcast come to life. So far, the podcast has essentially cost me maybe $150 in terms of costs. The rest
Bravo.
has been time, right? Because all we do is just record via Skype, and we edit a little bit of it, and we chuck it up online, and everybody enjoys it. At least that's what I think they do, because they keep asking for more guests to come on and add more value, and I was surprised as how large you think the crew is. In my mind, the tribe, the crew, the Rory guys and girls, I was thinking it can't be larger than like 5,000 max. You're giving me a hint that it's actually a lot larger than that, and just perhaps we haven't tapped into them yet.
Yeah, I know. The popularity of Nassim and Joe. If you take a look at the combined following of those 5,000, so he really, I met Nassim back in Montreal in 2012,
Hmm.
once, and there was a gathering. It wasn't it was not on Twitter. It was a Facebook, and he was, you know what? Forgive. I think he was writing. Geez, which book was he writing? I'm having a senior moment. I saw, but I mean, we were all very active. There was a Facebook, and there were only about maybe 250 of us,
Hmm.
and about 40. We all went to Montreal. Okay,
Oh wow.
it was quite an affair for 3 days. Okay,
Hmm.
and we you know that's when I met Virgil. Okay,
Hmm.
Jed, John Faithful Hamer,
Hmm.
um, Nassim, Nicholas Teague. So there so there may be, I guess, a series of concentric circles.
Mm.
Okay. And as you reach more and more domains, okay, so here, this is, entrepreneur. We're basically, most of today, we discussed entrepreneurship, which is probably the right thing for us to talk about. But then you know Michael Driver,
Mm.
he's so witty and smart and funny. Okay,
Mhm.
I don't have any of his charm. Okay, but
I don't think many people do.
yeah, that's true. Um, and then I think you'll see, and Joe is um, he's quite brilliant. I think you know that.
Oh, for
Uh,
sure.
and I think you'll like, Guru and applying these to his domain. So you have all these different domains,
Mm.
and what you're doing is tying them all together, and you kind of have this, um, eclectic mind, Ace. And Amber, I don't know you except for the podcast. Because I don't know. Are you on Twitter?
Yeah.
Okay.
She's a quiet observer type.
Okay.
Yes.
But no, um, the audience is much larger. It really is than you think.
Well, we look forward to, like I said, every time we run into a new member of the tribe, we appreciate like you said, I think what's interesting is the thread that kind of weaves across domains. And I happen to be fortunate enough to fall over this opportunity in regards that I can just sit there and talk to each person about their area of expertise, and I can somewhat relate a little bit to them. So it's enough to get the interesting conversation started, but it's almost always a full-blown exposition of their point of view, which I hope that you felt like you've had today.
Oh, absolutely.
So we want to get into some other stuff. We had some questions for you from various locations and Twitter and whatnot. So here's a question for you. Given the state of unprofitability of something like Twitter, how do you see them surviving in the future, considering they haven't done exactly what you've been advocating this whole time, of clipping their left tail?
They will be subsidized by the government.
Mm.
You see, the government and states,
Mm.
they require media to promote the narratives of power.
Mm.
And so they will subsidize them, and they already are. I mean, Google was subsidized by the NSA to the tune of $50 million to really launch themselves.
Mm.
Um, Sergey was in at Stanford, and he was given money to develop his algorithm called Birds of a Feather.
Mm.
So it was birds of a feather flock together. So it was the whole NSA wanted to know, well, if you were a terrorist, you're going to hang around with other terrorists.
Mm. Mm.
And back in 1998, the United States had a program called Carnivore, which
Mm.
was essentially to spy on every citizen.
Mm.
And that was outsourced to companies like Google,
Mm.
Facebook,
Mm.
Twitter,
Mm.
Amazon. Amazon sells first party data. Back in the day, when I had the catalog, direct to consumer catalog company, we had the largest military collection that we sold via catalog, which is really interesting because I'm always so anti war, but I've always been fascinated by military people and war.
Mm.
And I get a call from the FBI, and they visited me and they said, well, we understand that you've been selling um, videos to the Russian embassy,
Really?
to the Soviet embassy at the time.
Okay.
And I said, okay. I said, we sell to thousands and thousands of people. And
Mm.
said, well, we want to know what they wanted to buy.
Mm.
I said, well, you're asking me to violate the law.
Right.
Because Robert Bork was nominated for Supreme Court Justice, and the opposition, the Democrats, went to his video stores and wanted to know what he was renting. They wanted to know if he was renting porn or whatever.
Mm.
And so a law was passed for not giving, so that it was illegal to give information on what people bought or rented in
Mm.
video. Well, so when I said, well, that's against the law, and I said, what you're asking me to do is be an FBI informer.
Mm.
And he said, well, I didn't think that I wouldn't use those harsh words. I said, well, I didn't think being an FBI informer would be harsh to you. I said, look, I said, you can subpoena anything that you want, and I'll comply with the subpoena. But I'm just not going to give away what any person or organization buys because it's against the law. I'd be violating the law.
Mm.
Now, what Google, but so the government, if this happened to me, okay, I have a window into how it works.
Mm.
Okay, and then I've written about the Google NSA connection, and
Mm.
I know that Twitter, for example, Twitter, um, they have different rules in China versus and in the Middle East than they do in the United States.
Mm.
And now what we find is Facebook is, they got rid of YouTube got rid of 17,000 channels. Well, there's a reason. So how these media companies are going to survive is that they will be subsidized in order that they can propagate the myths and narratives of the oligarchs.
Uh,
So that's how they're going to survive.
So here's a question then. Follow up on that front is, so let's say these companies are now multinational in the way they deploy their technologies and their customers and user bases. How will the rest of the world react if the United States government is essentially funding one of the biggest sources of leaks of data from their country?
Well, I mean, they already know it. It's already happening. I
Mm.
mean, Amazon gives the government detailed information on certain people, what they buy.
Mm.
Okay, so they have a profile. Oh, this terrorist is going to buy this kind of fertilizer, this kind of these kind of ingredients. Okay, and they can buy it from Amazon. All right, so they have it. That's from Amazon, but they have different rules. Okay, 1% of all um, um, Google searches are eliminated in China,
Mm.
because Google wants access to the Chinese market, so they have to play by the China rules.
Right. Right.
Okay,
Right.
and it's no different in liberal democracies. It's different, but we have the illusion that we have true freedom,
Mm.
and we have freedom within the parameters, okay, of the narrative. That there's narrative construction, so to speak. So that is how it's going to be. Um, if they can't turn it around and they're necessary,
Mm.
they'll just get subsidized.
Right. 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 So then the question is as follows, right? So somebody who works in the field of software, I have a great appreciation for Nassim's point that he always harks on, which is the curse of dimensionality. I.e., no matter how much data you collect, eventually it becomes noise because you'll be misled in so many different directions. So is the fear really warranted, or is it just a sense of creepiness? Because the way I see it, and correct me if I'm wrong, the reason we feel weird and creeped out when somebody quote unquote is following us is because instinctively it's the idea of predator and prey. Right? So I don't like knowing that somebody's watching what I'm doing, because in the wild, if there's somebody watching what you're doing, it's almost like they're going to try to kill you and have you for dinner, right? So when you reconcile that fact of it and decide that you collect all this data, you have all these profiles, yet you're just generating noise after noise after noise, how do you foresee that story actually kind of coming together? Because in essence, it's almost always useless information, right?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of the problem of big data, and Nassim has actually proven this, is the problem of spurious correlation,
Yes.
which is hinting about what you're talking about.
Mm,
And I can tell you that I've been down that road
mm,
back in the day when I was a quant,
mm,
okay, and a quant marketer.
mm,
And you spend so much money
mm.
chasing false positives.
Right.
What happens with the government is that Stalin says, "Show me the man, and I'll show you the crime," or something along those lines. Okay, um, they have data on everybody, so they can have targets of choice. But
Mm,
there's a lot of false positives that they're going to get,
mm,
and they have. And I can tell you that within our own community here, I'm Palestinian,
mm.
the Palestinian community here, all of the phones in Chicago have been bugged for, from before 911.
Mm. So
Um,
are you
yeah,
saying that now my phone has been bugged because I had you on Skype? Is that what you're telling me?
yeah, you are. Yeah, there's no question. Okay, no question about it. I should have warned you.
Hi, random agent listening to this.
Right. You know what I mean? They're going to be very bored with my chatter. Okay.
Well, okay, so that's good. Well, we're going to lead into the next set of questions, which is related again to this is actually a specific question from a person who is starting a business and they don't necessarily want an online footprint. They just want like an old school business. Is that still possible in your mind? Is it still possible to run a business without having an online footprint if
Of
you're selling
course.
actual goods?
Yeah, of course. I mean, a friend of mine has a hot dog stand. If you go to New York and you see an awful lot of street vendors.
Mm,
I have a cousin that makes a really good living um, going to flea markets, and he buys, not knowing what kind of business it is. But there's not everything, if you're think about being a massage therapist.
mm,
You're not going to have. You don't need to be online for that. I mean, you could use marketing or whatever, but you don't need that.
mm,
Restaurants, you don't need an online presence for um, owning a good restaurant.
mm.
There's one. My favorite steakhouse is just 7 miles away from here, and Al Capone. It was one of his favorite places, and it's been owned by the same family,
Right.
okay, generations for 130 years.
Wow.
They don't need online. They
So,
have they have a website, but they don't need it.
right. So here was my question, right? So if you are, because I remember I actually reached out to you because I was trying to help a friend with a particular business that was essentially localized at the point of, it was a martial arts club. How would you advise customers who are in businesses of that sort to take advantage and leverage your experience and your knowledge so that they can actually add more to their bottom line in their business?
I would say that there's an art to creating joint partnerships.
Okay.
Okay, I'll give you an example. I had a restaurant that eventually went bust. Okay, all right. This was many years ago when I was in grad school,
Mm,
and I had to leave when my father got sick to run a restaurant that I knew nothing about. But it created these tremendous promotions that were extremely um, successful, of generating a tremendous amount of traffic and business, but we just couldn't sustain it
mm,
um, by creating a partnership.
mm,
I created a partnership with a radio station
mm,
whereby we had Monday Night Football. We had big screen TVs, and then they would come to every Monday night and broadcast from the restaurant bar.
mm,
Okay, and
mm.
we go through 12 kegs of beer in a night and have 50
Wow.
cents. But I mean, and it was no cost there, right? So the question is, where do you have an affinity to create a partnership? Like I told you, Pulse TV, we created a partnership with infomercial marketers. We
Right.
offered them something that they couldn't have,
Mm,
that they couldn't do. Because
right.
you even asked, hey, why don't they do it themselves? Well, they don't have the expertise. They don't have the ability to source 500 products. And we have 5 buyers, and their business is selling one product, you know, to Target and Walmart and all those and selling millions. We're selling thousands. They're not interested. So if you're in martial arts, it is what kind of an affinity? Is it going to be a you know what do they call the the
Oh, the clothing they wear?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
is it a gi or no?
I have no idea specifically to this particular one, but yeah, I kind of get what you're trying to get at.
Right, right. Or you know, yeah, you have to find. Therefore, you absorb. You cut down your risk by finding something that they can't do, and they can do something that you can't do.
Mm, I see what you mean. So, I think Ember had the next question on the list here. Ember, go ahead,
Yep.
please.
So how do you teach your boys your lessons? How do you pass down that information?
Um, you know, I have three sons.
Mm,
Yep.
One is a physical therapist, and then the other two work with us here. Um, I I'm actually overwhelmingly gentle because I write a lot.
mm,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they read what I write, and I'm here to answer questions. But I find that the father-son relationship can be really um, tough if it's imposed on them. So
mm,
I'm here. I will answer any question that they want, but I'm not force feeding them. I'm here to answer questions like when you ask me a question, Amber,
Yep.
okay, I'll answer it. If they ask me, um, I'll answer it. I've written books, but I didn't force my brand of Islam onto my sons.
mm,
They were free. Okay, my wife and I are Muslim, but they didn't cleave to it, not in the way that I would have hoped, but I didn't force them, and
mm.
so I'm much more, you know, I'll mentor the other people in the office much more than my sons because they're much more open.
I see. So the question we had from Paul was, if you do business with family, how do you maintain that relationship and maintain profitability without souring either side of the equation?
Yeah, and that goes to the why I also am much even with them here.
Mm,
I happen to be lucky, that um, my sons all are pretty good at what they do. I mean, my oldest son is in charge of all the creative, and he ends up buying about 40 to 50% of the products. He's
mm,
one on the group.
mm,
Um, and my other son is in charge of sales for Tricera, the data company.
mm,
But my sister and cousin, we co-founded this, and there's overwhelming amount of love.
mm,
That love matters,
mm.
and we've been together through the ups and downs, and we do different things.
Right.
All right. If we all did the same thing, it wouldn't work.
Right.
My cousin, he pays all the bills. He sleeps with the checkbook. In 23 years, I think I signed 5 checks.
Mhm. Also, so it goes back to Joe's conversation about friendships only start if the value systems align, right?
That is correct.
Hmm. Hmm.
And my sister's in Greece right now, so
Okay. Well, that's our list of questions that we had for you, Jaffer. Is there anything left that you wish to touch upon that we didn't get to?
um, I will say the one thing that I probably should have said that I did not.
Mm,
And that is that the more you look in the rear view mirror going forward,
mm,
okay, the more at risk you are. Now, this may sound like it is a violation of Lindy. He said, imagine you driving on a winding road,
mm.
but you're just looking in the rear view mirror. You're going to crash.
Right.
So if we understand that the future doesn't resemble the past is not a great predictor of the future. And so whenever you get this overwhelming urge to use historical data,
Mm.
be extremely circumspect with it. Be careful because it's not going to be the same going forward.
Right. Oh, that's an excellent point.
All right, and one last question. What are some books you would recommend to our viewers?
Books?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm reading two right now. One is called The Deniable Darwin, written by David Berlinski. And he's a mathematician who is critiquing the current state of Darwinian thought. He's not a creationist, okay? Uh, but what he does is say, what's wrong with the evolution theory as it exists today? So, and that kind of jives with my philosophy of critique. The other book I'm reading right now, I just got it in, is Nomi Prins' Collusion: How Central Banks Rig the System, Rig the World, rather. Nomi Prins is um, she's a very brilliant woman who was on the inside, and she worked for Lehman Brothers, but then she was there during the financial crisis of 2007, 8, and 9, and she knows the central banking system all over the world. It's a tremendous book. I most of what I read are critiques of something or other.
Via negativa, right?
That's correct.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jaffer, for joining us on this episode of Risky Conversations. We
I-
thoroughly enjoyed it. We hope you did as well.
It's actually been an honor, and both of you are extremely good at what you do. Believe me.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, until next time, thank you very much to our listeners. And we will put Jaffer's social media links on the podcast notes as well as the books you just recommended. Thanks. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we have. The truth is, any worthy conversation you'll ever have will inherently be a risky conversation, as long as it's open and honest where ideas are exchanged and emotions swirl. Thank you for listening, be anti-fragile, and carry on the ancient tradition in your own unique way, by saying what only you can say and doing what only you can do. Abiding by Milton's words, this is Emma Sadat signing off, wishing you the very best of worthy and risky conversations.